Hello, America. This is Call of Duty Goddess. Today is April the 14th, 2017. I posted a video yesterday titled Breaking Assad Interview on Recent Chemical Attack. It's a really good interview, and he says that ISIS is to blame for it. He said quite a few other things, and if you haven't watched it yet, I suggest you do. I'll leave a link below in the box. But I wanted to show you that the New York Times and Fox News has talked an awful lot about these chemical weapon attacks in the last few years. I want to show you what they said.
There are also new reports that the terror group is fighting back with suicide car bombs and chemical weapons. The Red Cross says doctors have treated at least 12 people for chemical weapons exposure this week, many of them children. Joining me now, Michael Waltz, the former Green Beret commander and counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney, also a Fox News contributor. Good to see you this morning.
Hey, good morning, Jen.
Okay, so one London-based research and intel watch group says that there are 52 times they count at least that ISIS has used chemical weapons, 19 of those in or around Mosul. It's potentially a war crime. Does that matter to ISIS?
Former CIA Director John Brennan testified last year that he believes ISIS is capable of producing on its own chemical weapons.
So here you have on March the 6th, 2017, about a month before the chemical weapons attack that was blamed on Bashar al-Assad, and therefore we had to bomb the crap out of him, happened. And in addition to that, you have the man being interviewed saying that John Brennan states in a congressional hearing that ISIS does have the means to use chemical weapons. Now, what Shannon Breen is referring to is this New York Times article titled ISIS Used Chemical Arms at least 52 times in Syria and Iraq, report says. The IHS conclusions were based on local news reports, social media, and Islamic State propaganda, and it marks the broadest compilation of chemical attacks in the conflict. American and Iraqi military officials have expressed growing alarm over the prospect of additional chemical attacks as allies press to regain both Mosul and Raqqa, the Islamic State capital of Syria. It goes on to state that the coalition is concerned about ISIL's use of chemical weapons. Colonel John Dorian, a military spokesman in Iraq, said in an email on Monday, using another name for the Islamic State, ISIL has used them in Iraq and Syria in the past, and we expect them to continue employing these types of weapons. The article goes on to state, in an effort to blunt the Islamic State's ability to make the weapons, the American-led air campaign has bombed militants associated with overseeing their production and the facilities where chemical ordnance is manufactured. In September, for instance, Allied warplanes attacked a converted pharmaceutical factory in northern Iraq, thought to have been a chemical weapons production facility. Well, gee, that's exactly what al-Assad said that they had done. They were just bombing buildings where ISIS was in. As Iraqi forces now advance into Mosul, analysts warned that the Islamic State could unleash more chemical attacks as they cede control. Iraqi forces have reclaimed about one-third of Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. As the Islamic State loses ground around Mosul, there is a high risk of the group using chemical weapons to slow down and demoralize advancing enemy forces, said Colm Strack, a senior analyst and the head of the IHS Conflict Monitor, and to potentially make an example of and take revenge on civilian dissidents within the city. Mosul was at the center of the Islamic State's chemical weapons production, Mr. Strack said, but most of the equipment and experts were probably evacuated to Syria in the weeks and months leading up to the Mosul offensive, along with convoys of other senior members and their families. I'm going to repeat that. But most of the equipment and experts were probably evacuated to Syria in the weeks and months leading up to the Mosul offensive, along with convoys of other senior members and their families. And this was from November 21st, 2016, less than 6 months ago. Now let's hear from a couple congressional members on the subject.
Congressman Thomas Massie does not just oppose the bombing of Syria. He says he's not even convinced that Assad was behind the chemical attack. It was a predicate for our response. Congressman Massie of Kentucky joins us now. Congressman, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me on tonight, Tucker.
So don't let me characterize your position. State it for us. You think that it has not been proved that the Assad regime was behind the chemical attack. Is that correct?
Well, you know, truth is the first casualty of war, and we're going to have four versions of the story coming forward. We're going to have the U.S. version, we're going to have the Russian version, Assad's version, and then there's going to be the truth in there. And we haven't been provided the details. I mean, I think it's incumbent upon the president to provide those details, at least to Congress. And you know what, Tucker? In 2013, just quickly, when they came to Congress and gave us classified briefings, when they had everybody convinced that Assad had used chemical weapons, in those classified briefings, they were not able to compel us to believe with sufficient evidence that Assad did it and that we should get involved.
Well, most of the Washington establishment has been gung-ho for all this, as we just said. One of the few lawmakers who isn't is Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat, who criticized the escalation as reckless and warned it could cause a much broader war. She joins us tonight from Hawaii. Congresswoman, thanks for coming on. So,
aloha, Tucker.
You have heard media outlets that probably support you generally describe people who have qualms about what happened last night as bigots. Do you think that's a fair characterization?
We, as the American people, should be concerned when any president of the United States launches an illegal and unconstitutional military strike against a foreign government. This is something that Congress has not authorized, and it's an escalation of a counterproductive regime change war in Syria that our country's been waging for years. First, for many years through the CIA covertly, and now overtly through President Trump's reckless military strike last night. As you know well, Tucker, this is a war that has cost hundreds of thousands of Syrian lives. It has caused millions of Syrian refugees to flee their home. And it has strengthened these terrorist groups operating on the ground in Syria, like Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, ISIS, and others, whose sole goal is to overthrow the Syrian government, to take over and take ownership over Syria.
So this attack, last night's mission, was predicated on this sarin gas attack earlier in the week. And everyone we've talked to on this show, people with access in some cases to classified intelligence, has said unequivocally the Assad government did this, killed these children with poison gas. Do you believe that?
It doesn't matter what I believe or not. What matters is evidence and facts. And
do you think there is evidence for that?
If the Trump administration has the evidence unequivocally proving this, then share it with the American people. Share it with Congress. Come to Congress and make your case before launching an unauthorized, illegal military strike against a foreign government. You know, Iraq is not so far off in our memories, especially for people like me who not only served there, but who lost friends there. And we remember when the then Bush administration, including Colin Powell and others, came to Congress and came to the United Nations presenting so-called evidence of weapons of mass destruction that later proved to be false.
Right.
So the disaster that is Iraq war was predicated on so-called evidence. You know, we are seeing already how taking this action by weakening the Syrian government, the Syrian military, de facto you are strengthening and empowering these terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda in their effort, again, to take over all of Syria.
What Tulsi Gabbard just said is very interesting. I'm at the war map in Syria, and this is from April 4th, 2017. And the war map is color-coded, basically. In the black, or gray, is the Islamic State. That's what they hold. The yellow is the Kurds. That's what they hold. The green are the rebels, the Free Syrian Army, the moderate rebels. That's those right there. Okay? They are the ones that we help. Now, these rebel forces of the Free Syrian Army are al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and other groups of the like. Now, what did Tulsa say about Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra?
And it has strengthened these terrorist groups operating on the ground in Syria, like Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, ISIS, and others.
They're supposed to be the moderate rebels. They're ISIS. They're interchangeable with ISIS. Getting back to the war map, now that we've established who's who, mainly in this gray or black area is ISIS, okay? So, as an example of what Tulsa is talking about, giving ISIS more leeway by Trump coming in and bombing them. 9 days ago, the gas attack on Khan Sheikhoun in Syria, which was about right here. Here it was, actually. And that was from April 4th, 2017. Now we'll go after the missile strike that happened on April the 6th and see what happens with the ground that ISIS gained. Take a look at the ground that ISIS gained after the attack. We'll go to April 6th next. Here is when the Tomahawk missile strikes happen. I guess it's for time change. It's on April 7th, 2017. Okay? By April 9th, 2017, look at all the ground that ISIS has gained.
Some lawmakers questioning whether chemical weapons were even used by the Assad regime in Syria last week. Former Ohio Congressman Dennis Kucinich met with Assad earlier this year, has met with him multiple times, and he says he is skeptical as well. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us this morning. So you're skeptical. You acknowledge that chemicals were used in Syria, but you're skeptical that Bashar al-Assad was the one who unleashed them?
Well, I agree with Representative Gabbard that we should have had an investigation here and then made a determination as to who was responsible. By assuming that Assad was responsible, we're ignoring evidence that was presented in a chemical attack against Ghouta in 2013, where a UN weapons inspector, an MIT scientist, and a scientist from Tesla Labs all concluded that that particular attack was launched from within rebel territory. So you've got to be careful about drawing conclusions.
So, are you alleging then that the information that was released by the Trump administration, the flight patterns of the Syrian jets and others from that base, that's not true? That they didn't have any evidence?
Well, keep this in mind. The flight patterns could have been correct, except suppose the gas was released on the ground after the attack. See, these are the kinds of things that an investigation would show. But
have rebels been shown to use gas in Syria?
Yes.
How, I mean, chemical attacks on the scale of which Assad has already been shown to use? Because you would acknowledge that Assad has used chemical weapons on his own people before, correct?
I would not acknowledge that.
You would not. So why was Russia told in 2013 to assist in making sure Assad removes all these chemical
different.
weapons?
It's one thing to have chemical weapons, it's another thing to use them. Russia was told that. You're 100% right. And in an interview that I did with Assad for Fox News, Assad said that he was getting rid of these weapons. So here's the thing. Were they released on the ground? But beyond that, is it in the interest of the United States to, in effect, assist ISIS? We say we're against ISIS, but ISIS is slaughtering Christians, anybody who doesn't agree with their point of view. Why are we helping ISIS? And also Saudi Arabia, which the president met with, was responsible for 9/11. Saudis are players here. Well, and why are we helping the people who helped bring about 9/11? I don't understand it. Somebody's got to tell me that.
You're asking some fair questions about what the end game looks like. I don't think anyone could acknowledge that America willingly wants to help Al-Qaeda or ISIS.
The problem is that we are helping and teamed up with Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra. The Free Syrian Army is nothing but ISIS that's cleaned and shaven. We are teamed up with ISIS. NATO created ISIS. That's the thing about NATO. These other countries in NATO are involved in this as well. But what they do is hide behind America's skirt tails. And America gets the blame for everything. But then again, America is right out there in front. And it's not the American people. It's these people who are in control of our country and who've basically taken it over. This is Call of Duty Goddess signing off, and as always, I've got your 6.